going, friends? So I haven't been on camera in quite some time, and that's resulted in a fair bit of on-camera anxiety. I can't even look the camera in the lens because for whatever reason that's worse than eye contact for me. So instead I'm just watching my recording on my monitor. However, to spare you guys from the terrible webcam quality and the inevitable anxious fidgeting, most of these videos will be done in a commentary format where I just sort of voice over the content that I want to showcase. But at the very least, I did want to do an in-person introduction to these videos. Anyway, the topic of these videos that I've been wanting to do. I know it's not super traditional for YouTubers to come out and release a series of videos sort of documenting in detail a period of their lives. The most I think I've ever seen is like a Draw My Life or something, but I could be wrong. I don't watch that much YouTube to know. Regardless, there's a lot that I kind of want to outline about the last like decade almost of my career, and a lot of stuff I haven't really felt safe to say or comfortable to say, or I've wanted to say and just didn't know how. So this video might be less of like answering questions for people or filling in the blanks and more so catharsis for me. So bear with me if it doesn't seem like traditional Miss Breezy haha funny explosion poop fart jokes, but this is really important to me. So without further ado, what does an original character mean to you? In all of my years of being an internet connoisseur, I've learned that the roles original characters play in our lives can vary greatly from person to person. Some people might have fun creating a menagerie of original characters, while some might bond with one and use that as their main representation of themselves, which is more often than not what we refer to as a persona. These fictional projections of ourselves can span a broad spectrum: furries, anime, or in my case, pastel sapien equines, and they offer us opportunities to live vicariously in ways that our circumstances might not allow. We might take our personas and put them through situations we aren't ready to conquer yet, or we might have them enjoy things we don't currently have the freedoms to enjoy. In any case, it's through these experiences with our characters that allow us to learn about ourselves without even knowing it. Some people go pretty deep, refusing to acknowledge they exist as an agent beyond their online projection, while others might find themselves taking a more relaxed approach, using their character as something subtle, like a mascot for their own personal brand, or just something they made because they think it looks aesthetic. Whatever the case may be, our OCs mean a lot to many of us, and depending on the individual, we bond with them on different levels. Me personally, on a scale of, haha, this is a character I like, to, I am literally this and there is no me outside of this, I think I'd probably find myself comfortably in the middle. Okay, a smidge to the right. Breezy means a lot to me. Like, a lot. Because given the aforementioned context, she helped me learn incredible amounts about the person I am without having the ability to do it traditionally, especially in regards to my identity. And for those of you who are still confused about what I mean when I say identity, 1, literally go back like 3 or 4 years on this channel, that should answer your question. 2, if you're still confused, I'll be including a video about my transition in this series of videos at some point, so that should clear things up. Anyway, since I want to reserve a lot of information from my early beginnings for other videos in this series, I'll offer context that might lack thorough explanation, but we'll get the basic points across. Back toward the start of the last decade, the 2010s, I'd stumbled upon a show that would veer my life in a direction I'd never expected. Or rather, I was too young to foresee. I found the show around mid-2011 because someone on my Skype friends list had a rainbow-colored horse as their profile picture. I figured it was done ironically, so out of curiosity I did some googling and I found the show, as you do, and I watched the show. As you do. And to the dismay of my incredibly self-conscious and unbearably confused younger self, I actually really fucking liked it. I initially watched it in secret, shaming myself every time I pulled up another episode. How could I actually be enjoying this unironically? Well, give or take a month or two, I found that there was in fact a growing online fandom for the show, and that those people who were outwardly displaying those pony pictures, while somewhat ironic, did actually enjoy the show itself. I'm not gonna provide a comprehensive survey timeline of the history of bronies. There are already videos out there that do a pretty good job of just that, so I'm gonna move forward with the assumption that we all have a pretty decent understanding about the history of that fandom. Well, about a year or so into it, the diversity of creative mediums being shared by fans had grown quite substantially. And naturally, one of the larger portions of fan-created content out there was fanfiction. At first, I scoffed at the idea of enjoying fan-written stories about an already perfect canon, but considering that the community was notorious for breaking down personal, traditional, masculine boundaries, it was only a matter of time before I eventually caved and found myself enjoying a myriad of fan-created stories. Quick sidebar. While this will be elaborated in a future video, I also want to note that I'd always had an interest in the idea of altering my identity. My gravitation towards anything transformation mixed with my confusion about my identity had been a common pattern throughout my younger years, and more notably during this time. That said, one story I stumbled upon had drawn my attention more than any other at the time, and it was a story of the main character, who was initially male, taking the form of a female pony. Now, in the past decade, I've learned this is actually pretty common for people who have struggled with aspects of their identity, to enjoy content, stories, art, and even movies where someone takes the form of something more ideal. At the time, however, this was new to me. Sure, I'd seen movies like Brother Bear or Princess and the Frog, where someone turns into another species. That's been a common storytelling trope for quite some time, but never had I really encountered anything that depicted a character switching their gender. It was from that moment I was hooked. Any hope I had of retaining some sort of boundary with enjoying this pony-oriented medium was effectively gone. I went balls deep, man. To an extent I don't really want to fully outline in this video because while enjoying all of these novel ideas, I still had maintained my outward appearance at the time as being the YouTube personality that I was. My YouTube career was still a very new thing as all of this was happening in the background, and there was no way I was going to taint my opportunities by outright exposing my interests in what, at the time, would have easily been seen as very weird shit. Thankfully, we're in 2020 now, and between the pandemic and the end of the world, people don't really give a shit anymore. It's kind of the reason why I'm making this video. So, given my natural descent into this new form of escapism, it would eventually lead to my yearning for something that offered a more personal attachment. Something that would allow the escapism to feel more immersive. And that's where the idea to create an original character was prompted. This happened probably around the latter half of 2012, when pastel horse OCs were starting to become a common occurrence. Many people in that community would begin using these characters as representations of themselves, and the pony-related content they may or may not have been producing. Now again, at the time, this was very new for me. I recognize now that the concept behind having a Sona has existed for quite some time, especially when considering the furries had already been doing it for decades at this point. However, the only real experience I had with pushing any sort of original character as a projection of myself was this goddamn train wreck of a Minecraft skin. I also still didn't want to botch any opportunity I had with the larger, more prominent YouTube gaming community, so I pushed forward with doing everything in secret. Well, secret to an extent. It was no secret to my audience that I enjoyed the show, as I hinted at it more and more in my older videos until it was just blatantly obvious. I never outright disclosed, however, my deeper connection beneath the umbrella. That being this growing attachment between me and this OC I'd slowly been creating. The early origins of my character featured crudely recolored pieces from other people's art, and the occasional gift or commission from artist friends that knew about my secret interests behind the scenes. Indulging in these previously stifled feelings kept opening door after door and allowed me to ask bigger and more thorough questions about my identity. I eventually began writing about this character, who up until this point was nameless, and after a long few weeks of pondering names, I had settled on calling her Breezy. I would write about her enjoying things traditionally feminine, going on adventures I didn't have the confidence to do myself, and even finding romantic partners that heavily conflicted with my upbringing's traditional views. It was through all of this living vicariously through my fictional character, that I was literally resolving so many buried emotions and questions that had tormented me for as long as I could remember. It was liberation from my own internal mysteries, literally, as a result of a character I fabricated with my own imagination. See, everyone has their own means and path when it comes to understanding and exploring their personal identities, and this one just so happened to be mine. These weren't so much just daydreams and fantasies, but tools that allowed me to ask previously unfathomable and traditionally taboo questions about who I was. So, as one would expect, from there, my own personal library of everything Breezy related began to grow, and eventually it would reach an extent where hiding it wasn't very realistic. Now, mind you, I played the long game on this one. I got daring with my hints in previous videos. Nearly every one of my old uploads has a hidden clue of some sort regarding what I eventually deemed was the inevitable. At one point, I even made an entire video foreshadowing the whole thing.
You all right, buddy? You act like you haven't seen yourself before. No, but I mean, like, how are you? I'm you from the future. Wait a minute, they have time travel in the future? Well, duh, it's not like they had time travel in the past. But you're in the past, so it technically means that we have time travel in the past.
I wasn't fucking around, man. I feel like it'd be kind of fun to do this, though, as like its own video, to like go through and try to hunt for all the hints. Maybe I'll think about it. Anyway, Breezy's first real appearance on the channel came in July of 2013, when I uploaded a gameplay of the MLP fan game, Legends of Equestria.
It's not that I'm self-conscious that I'm playing this game, and if you're asking why I'm a girl pony, it's because I didn't want people to think that I was actually a guy in real life playing this game, okay? Maybe my OC is a girl.
If you go back and watch these videos, please keep in mind that I was a psycho little shit, and I had incredible amounts of repressed emotion, so it's pretty cringy. She would go on to make consistent appearances from the same game and a few other uploads on the channel.
Oh, I'm just a little agitated! Bah!
There was actually an upload I did with Robin, whose OC is named Bing, whose YouTube name is Cycron. That actually is what sort of brewed my initial crush that I would go on to have for him.
Well, basically, I hail from the city of Detroit, and
Oh my god. Detroit, really? I'm gonna blow my brains out. I come from the city of Colorado Springs.
Give me a kiss.
Give me smooches! Smooches!
You gonna sizzle my sausage?
But that's another video. So there was a subsequent period where I tried to brush off some of the questions I was getting about why I was uploading these gameplays with a female OC. I could have easily deflected the questions by saying something like, I don't know, she's cute, but I was too afraid of anyone catching on, so I would discard the use of Breezy for a few uploads. And by a few uploads, I mean like 10 months. I had my fun, dipping my toe in the water and testing things out, but the idea of my audience knowing just yet was a little too much for me to handle. Not to mention that those months that followed wore a very somber tone. Many different aspects of my life would begin to see change that I just wasn't mentally equipped to be coping with. This next part of my life was very confusing, and it would be the source of a lot of negative chain reactions for years to come. There were a couple of large losses in my family. We were incredibly broke. My YouTube statistics had come to a complete halt. We would eventually be evicted from my childhood home due to flooding, and my internal identity crisis was reaching a point that couldn't be ignored. I often would find myself depressed, confused, defeated, and sometimes hopeless. That's not to say that there weren't happy moments and fun little projects in between, but ultimately the depressed undertone would usually take precedence in whatever I was doing. I was 18 at the time, and my only real escape when the depression would hit was alcohol and literally anything regarding my OC. If I ever felt like I needed to take a break from reality, I'd get drunk and I'd write about Breezy being in some more ideal situation. At a certain point, I refused to acknowledge I was anyone else but her. She was the only part of me living a life that I felt content with. And so, I would escape. Escapism had been a pattern for me for a while at this point, but now it was like all-consuming. Breezy was my safety blanket, my comfort. As a result, my motivation for creating was close to none.
Really, I come to you guys today because as a creator, I'm at a fucking loss. I don't know where to go from here.
And whatever I did release would hold this very obvious undertone of sadness. It's no wonder my videos weren't doing well. They weren't happy. My audience needed happiness just as much as I did, and I couldn't give it to them.
So further apologies if I look dead on the inside and the out.
Much of my escapism around this time would take place on Garry's Mod Dark RP servers. You know, those old pony ones? That's where I spent like 90% of my life during the latter half of 2014. Those servers were just bustling with funny, chaotic individuals that never failed to put a smile on my face. Every time I logged in, I was Breezy, and everyone I interacted with would treat me as such. This isn't a sad thing though, because despite the grim state of my life, the happiness these servers gave me would eventually be enough to motivate me to create again. And what better place to start than on the servers themselves?
Mein Food are El Darude Sandstorm.
The vibe of these servers fit pretty well with the chaotic energy my audience was used to, and the videos I made on them ended up performing pretty well. And then, on November 20th, 2014, at the peak of my motivation to turn things around, I took an incredibly bold step and started a video with this very blatant intro.
P.S. There is no subtle insinuation behind the name Breezy. I totally promise. There's no reason why I use that name on Steam. There definitely is. Don't look into it.
After that, naturally, the questions started coming in mass. I still tried to play it off, however, because once the videos began doing well again, I scared myself out of being honest with my audience and tried to deflect all the Breezy horse stuff as haha, funny, ironic pony community things.
Definitely not a horse fucker.
For the first time since the start of my career, I was actually pulling in a livable wage, and I was gonna do everything in my power to keep myself from fucking it up. I was scoring really cool opportunities and collaborations from very prominent figures on YouTube back then.
Hey everyone, it's me, GamerGuy88, and I'm cool to...
And the last thing I wanted was for them to think I was some sort of freak.
Can you stop?
Which, like, obviously I am. I should have just owned it. But you also have to remember, even though this was only 6 years ago, the hostility towards gender identity was infinitely worse than it is today. I mean, we've made incredible progress in the last 5 years alone with acceptance and understanding gender identity. But during this time, there would be a lot of friction if anyone ever suspected I might be trans. So it was very hard to be public about it without effectively self-destructing my YouTube career. I would continue to use my Breezy model here and there, but I would always make sure that I took steps to deflect any curiosity by making sure it seemed obvious that I was only joking about it and doing it ironically by making fun of myself or bronies in general.
Are you really fucking that pony?
From that point on, my use of Breezy would become more and more frequent. It would reach a point where my audience would vocalize disappointment whenever she didn't appear in videos. So not only did I get to use a projection of myself that I felt comfortable with, but my audience loved her. It was kind of a dream come true, to be honest. During this period, I would finally drum up the confidence to confront my internal gender identity conflict behind the scenes. I finally had the money to pursue the changes I needed, and for once, things didn't seem so fucking hopeless. I still struggled greatly with depression, but I wasn't stuck. And no matter how depressed I got, I was still taking steps forward. That said, I was also becoming more and more vocal about these endeavors on platforms like my Twitter, and it wasn't long before that side of my audience began to catch on. I was still able to play stupid on YouTube, convincing my audience that nothing was up, but anyone who followed me on Twitter during this time pretty much knew. Information spreads like wildfire on social media, and while I was met with an inspiring amount of love when information about me being trans would reach further and further corners of the internet, it also came at the cost of some serious backlash. And a lot of this backlash would catch me way off guard, as a large portion of it came from the brony community itself. 2016 bronies were just great. So good. The hype of bronies and My Little Pony at this time was reaching its peak. Many people were hopping on board, if only for the sake of being part of something. This led to the idea that it had to be normalized. It had to be seen as less weird as possible to onlookers, because the people joining the hype train couldn't do so at the cost of their fragile egos. Jenny Nicholson actually does a pretty good job at outlining this period of the brony fandom in her video The Last BronyCon.
Even as bronies were being extremely vocal about loving and tolerating everyone, being and accepting fandom, they're the first in line to be like, no, well, we're not gay.
So if you want more information about the objectivity of the brony timeline, I'd suggest giving it a watch. Anyway, this also meant that there were fairly popular figures within the community that said some pretty nasty shit to me when they found out. And they said it publicly! That's how validated this mindset was! After these confrontations, my distaste for the community naturally grew, and I did quite a lot to separate myself from it. I enjoyed ponies, and Breezy in my own little corner of YouTube and completely isolated myself. Aside from working with my group of close friends at the time, I would rarely attempt to reach out or interact with anyone outside of that. My timeline with Breezy beyond this point isn't great. The more hate I received, the more my distaste for her grew. She would begin to become this reminder of how much hate I received for just doing what was best for me. I felt alone. I was chastised by this community I thought was meant to emphasize the acceptance of the non-traditional, not scrutinize it even further. It got to a point where every time I saw Breezy, I didn't feel the happiness and comfort I once had. I just saw what I assumed other people saw. A freak hiding behind a pony OC. It was so invalidating and humiliating, and it boiled up to a point where I wanted to wipe that stain from my life entirely. I would, however, like to add, because this portion of the script was kind of brutal, I recognize that not everyone, only a very small vocal minority made up for the behavior that I'm referencing, and I don't want to discredit all of the good that came from the fandom around this time. I was distant from it, so I can't speak on it other than what I personally experienced and what I've heard from other people's accounts. Most people seem to enjoy the hell out of it, and while I might always be a little salty that I didn't get to experience it in that way, I'm ultimately happy that the fandom was a positive influence on so many people's lives. I also admit that some of it was partially my fault for allowing a few bullies to scare me away from something I enjoy, but I don't want the lasting message of this segment to be painting the community in a bad light. I just wanted to outline that there were some characters in the community that made it a little bit shitty for me. They said mean words. They hurt my feelings. Around the end of 2017, I adopted this weird, comical, mutilated humanoid version of her that my friend Ashiboob had made for me. Then shortly after, I had an anime-oriented model made and tried to distance myself from any and everything pony. The only time Breezy would show up is when I depicted her as being dead or being a shell of her former self. Even then, I only did this so that I could use the likeness of her model in thumbnails to draw clicks. This is a little awkward watching you mangle my dead body.
Hey, don't worry about it. Hey, look, I got it. Now watch this,
Alright,
okay?
Quentin, drop her in the boat.
Gently.
Rest easy, my old horse self. This would continue for the next couple of years. Rarely would you see Breezy on my channel, because during this time I tried to pursue this sense of normality that I never had before. Or rather, I tried living as a normal, non-internet person. Because at this point I was passing, and no one outside of my past or my viewer base knew about my history. No longer could I be criticized for my unordinary interests or choices. But alongside this newfound pursuit of the normal came the adpocalypse, and between the painful mix of veering away from what made me recognizable, dealing with a huge breakup, and literally making no money from YouTube ads anymore, I sort of lost it. I had almost overnight lost my livelihood, and alongside all my other stresses, I went a little nuts. Those next couple of years following the end of 2017 would just be breakdown after breakdown, self-destructive episode after self-destructive episode. So you can only imagine how wonderful and also healthy the next portion of my life was. I got pretty heavily involved with raving and concerts, and probably ingested every recreational substance under the sun, which, to no one's surprise, led to an immense struggle with addiction. A lot of my savings was spent traveling to festivals and getting fucked up. It was incredibly damaging and unbelievably embarrassing. I mean, I'm embarrassed just talking about it right now, but I played it off as if I knew what I was doing. I guess in a way I did. I was trying to self-destruct. The thought of ruining my life made me happy for whatever reason. I know I keep saying this, but I will be going over this period of time more thoroughly in another video, because I also don't really want to go super in depth with this period. There's a lot to it, and I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying now. Just know that, like, I'm on an uphill path. Things are better. I'm getting good grades. I'm a straight A student, but it ties into the story, so just chill. Anyway, 2020 creeps around the corner, but not much has changed. There's still an incredible amount of struggle behind the scenes, except this time I'm dealing with a second breakup from someone I'd been dating during those past 2 years. I knew full well that I was going to be just as crazy, if not crazier, in the coming year. I had even more festivals planned, and resources that would keep me high out of my mind for as long as I wanted. The stage was set for me to utterly fuck up my life. But then, the pandemic happened. When COVID hit and all the events and shows were canceled, I had like a second identity crisis. Who was I if I couldn't go to shows? Who was I if I wasn't fucked up in a crowd of strangers? My initial panic from the lockdown sent me on a bit of a bender, and I was consistently not sober for like 14 days. The bender would finally stop because during an acid trip, my sleep deprivation elicited probably the biggest panic attack I've ever had, and I had to call my parents to come pick me up and help me. It was a whole mess. It was a dark spot, okay? It was like rock bottom, so don't judge me. They had no idea what I'd been doing those 2 weeks. I wasn't really in contact with them, so naturally they were super caught off guard. The withdrawal from a 2-week heavy bender isn't something to joke about either. I was in a lot of pain for like 5 days following, and I gained like 10 pounds. After things had finally leveled out a bit, and I was reassociating myself with the feeling of baseline sobriety, I looked toward other means of comfort that didn't involve harming myself. The past couple years of my life were already challenging enough, but now there was a pandemic to deal with. I was scrolling through my phone one day and I found the album of Breezy art I've had saved for some time. I started looking through it and I literally just broke down crying. Looking at those pictures, recalling my past, every comforting emotion from my history with Breezy came right back to the forefront. All of those worries of trying to distance myself from her because of a few mean words people said seemed so pathetic when compared with the real monsters I'd conquered during those 2 years prior. So, I started using her as a projection of me once again. I didn't care if it seemed weird or if it discouraged opportunity. I didn't care if it ruined my reputation of normality or veered people away from viewing my content. Reconnecting myself with this character that meant so much to me gave me the motivation to finally reapproach YouTube in the way that I wanted to. And it allowed me to reach out to people in the community in ways that I wasn't able to before. For the first time in a very long time, Breezy has become my safety blanket again. The interesting part about all of this is that, given the ending of the show and the subsequent shrinking of the community, it's actually resulted in a more intimate, niche atmosphere similar to the one I was familiar with when everything began. My past actions of using a pony OC as the first official feminine projection of myself isn't, and will never be exclusive to me, as there are tons of people who have done and are currently doing the same now. Like I said, everyone has their own means of self-exploration. And this one just so happened to be mine. After my return to YouTube, and even during my time away, I've received thousands, yes, thousands of emails, tweets, DMs, comments at this point of people thanking me, with some of the most heartfelt messages I've ever read, thanking me for being brave and patient enough to do what I did in the middle of the spotlight of my YouTube career, and how inspiring it's been for them to conquer their own conflicts with identity. Similar to the way that fanfic I read so long ago offered me the initial tools to ask these questions about myself, I'd now done the same for others. The fact that I've had any sort of impact still blows my mind, and I'm so happy that everything I went through wasn't done in vain. My channel may have, and may even still suffer as a result of my transition and my implementation of ponies. But it really doesn't matter when I think of all the people that I might have helped in the long run. And this is basically why you've been seeing a lot of Breezy again. And this is why she won't be going away anytime soon. Breezy is my safety blanket, my comfort, and largely my past. And in that sense, I myself am... I'm not going to loop it around like that. That's lame. I want to thank you all for spending the time to watch this first installment of a series of videos that are going to outline the finer details of the aforementioned periods of my life. I hope it makes a little bit more sense why I'd want to get this one out of the way first, as it sets the stage for a lot of events and decisions that would otherwise lack context. If you have any questions, or if I left out any details that might not be covered, feel free to tweet me or something. I can do my best to elaborate. But with all of that said, I love you all. I really do. And I hope to see you in the next upload.